Before I begin, I'll warn you, I coined a term as I was writing this sermon. It is the Mad sermon, meaning this is a Mad sermon, meaning there's a long build-up before I get to the point. Taken from the lovely and wonderful Rachel Mad but stick with me, I promise there is a point, and I'll make it eventually. Am I my brother's keeper? This is a question that has resonated throughout the ages and continues to shape the core of our humanity. The origins of this question are rooted in one of the oldest stories in human history, the story of Cain and Abel. It's a narrative that has been passed down through generations, found in the book of Genesis in the Bible. While it's a story that belongs to the religious traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, its message transcends any one faith and speaks to the fundamental principles of compassion and unity that unite us as human beings. In the story, two brothers, Cain and Abel, stand at the center of a familial drama. While it may be tempting to think of this as the world's first sibling rivalry, there's more to the story. Cain and Abel both make offerings to God. Cain, a farmer, offers the fruit of his harvest as a sacrifice to God, while Abel, a shepherd, presents the fat of the firstborn from his flock. Both brothers offered to God a sacrifice that was reflective of not only their occupations, but their identities. But God did not look upon both sacrifices the same. Instead, they favored and accepted Abel's sacrifice and rejected Cain's. I never understood this from a religious standpoint, but from a purely culinary perspective, and I hope I don't offend my vegan friends, I would prefer a good lamb chop over vegetables any day. Nevertheless, Cain does not take this rejection well. He allows anger and jealousy to overwhelm him, driving him to kill his own brother. When God comes to visit again and inquires as to the whereabouts of Abel, Cain attempts to dodge responsibility with the question, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Cain's response transcends the immediate context. He's not merely challenging the implication that he should know the location of his biological brother. His question, and the question I hope to explore today, is whether mankind has a responsibility to look out for and to care for those around us, especially when they're struggling. This question cuts right to the heart of what it means to be human and live in a community. Am I my brother's keeper? For brevity and inclusiveness throughout this sermon, I'll shorten it to, am I my neighbor's keeper? As we reflect on this question, we're reminded of the importance of compassion and support during difficult times. Undoubtedly, we've all witnessed others who seem to be lost and in need of someone to reach out a hand and offer to be their keeper or guide. Probably all of us have experienced moments in our lives when we've hit rock bottom, and we felt like we had nowhere to turn. As I was writing this sermon, the subtitle I wrote here was Rock Bottom. As I pondered how I could best illustrate this concept, I remembered an experience that had a profound impact on my life and memory. In the summer of 1997, I was just 17 years old, almost 18, and had just graduated from high school. I planned to join the military, but those hopes were destroyed when I weighed in at Fort Jackson and the Army told me I was too fat to be a soldier. As I was searching for direction in my life, I began to feel a calling to the ministry. But this wasn't something I could enter into lightly. I needed to be certain. So I went to a minister from my church to seek advice, who advised me to lay down a fleece. If you're not familiar with this phrase, it's inspired from the Bible story involving Gideon. Gideon, being uncertain of his calling, asked God to give him a specific sign. Laying a fleece of wool on the ground, Gideon asked God to confirm his calling by making the fleece wet with dew while keeping the ground dry around it, and then to reverse it, making the ground wet with dew while making with the fleece dry. I didn't have any fleeces of wool lying around, so I asked God for a different sign. If I am indeed called to preach, have someone I don't know approach me and tell me. Not long after, I was sitting in the break room of Shoney's where I waited tables. A coworker I'd never met came and sat down with me. She introduced herself to me as Miss Dorothy, whose day job was to keep the breakfast buffets fresh and stocked, but she was also a preacher. After she told me about her ministry, I remarked that I was still searching for God's direction in my life. Then the dew fell upon my proverbial fleece, when she confidently proclaimed, "You're gonna preach." And for years to come, that is where I ended the story. But that's not where the story ended. Miss Dorothy, the prophet of the Shoney's breakfast buffet, actually said more to me, but the rest of her prophecy was omitted from my story because it did not fit my theology. Her entire prophetic utterance was, and after all these years, I still remember it word for word, "You're going to preach. You'll study the Bible, but when you preach, you need to forget about the Bible. Those are other people's testimonies," she said. "You're going to preach your testimony." It was not until I was writing this sermon that I realized Miss Dorothy's entire prophecy had come true. See, I could pull from a number of biblical narratives that illustrate people hitting rock bottom. Bible stories that are often omitted from sermons and Sunday school lessons. Noah, for example, who after a series of events found himself in a deeply troubling situation leading to inappropriate relations with his own daughters. Then there's the story of Absalom, whose justified anger over his sister's assault led him to revolt against King David, ultimately resulting in his tragic death. We can't forget Peter, whose greed drove him to deny Christ and in a moment of despair took his own life. And of course, there's the quintessential example of hitting rock bottom, the story of the prodigal son, who after squandering his father's inheritance hit such a low point that he envied the food given to pigs. I could delve into great detail about any one of these or many other stories, but those are other people's testimonies. I need to preach my own. And much like the Bible, when I read aloud from the book of my life, there are some chapters that I often skip past. But today I feel compelled to share at least a glimpse of that with you today. Specifically, I'm referring to my rock bottom moment. As I preached to you on the first Sunday for over a year now, you may have noticed some gaps in my biography, things that don't quite add up. For instance, I've shared my journey numerous times, especially about the pivotal moment in 2007 when I served as a pastor of a Pentecostal church in Georgetown, South Carolina. During that time, when I came out of the closet, leading to my departure from the church and the dissolution of my marriage. But you've also met my daughters who live right here in Bullitt County, as does their mother, my ex-wife. I've mentioned that they came here with me when I worked for Bullitt County Schools. And until just a few years ago, I lived with them not far from here in Brooklet. I've talked about my divorce in 2009. And I've also mentioned my divorce in 2020. Much like a puzzle with a conspicuous gap, there's a critical piece of my life story that hasn't found its place in the narrative that I've shared. However, it's not that the puzzle piece was missing, but rather I had it tucked away in my pocket, afraid to take it out until now. Still a little afraid today. Like many people, my rock bottom moment involved alcohol, which I first encountered when I was 27 years old. Growing up, my parents never drank. And during my teenage years and early 20s, my religious devotion led me to see even the slightest consumption of alcohol as sinful. However, when I came out, I not only lost my church, the only community I had ever known, but also nearly every important relationship in my life. I sought to find that lost sense of community and belonging within the LGBTQ community. Unfortunately, the only place I knew to connect with other LGBTQ individuals was in a gay bar, where I was introduced to drinking for the first time in my life. Having no concept of drinking in moderation, whenever I partook of alcohol, it was always in excess. Let me pause to clarify that I don't want to diminish the value of the friendships and relationships formed during this time in my life. When I craved a sense of community, they were there for me. When my family members, both figuratively and sometimes even literally, turned their backs on me, the familiar faces in the bar became my family. However, my social life revolved around a bar stool, and I had no positive examples of moderation in my life. This led me to believe that the only way to have fun and be social was to drink, and the only way to drink was to binge drink. During this period, I was in a series of relationships, most of which, in retrospect, ended due to excessive drinking on my part, their part, or both. Only one of these relationships lasted more than a few weeks. We lived together, and most of the time our relationship was healthy. My daughters spent weekends and extended time during the summer with us. We were happy together as long as we were not drinking, which meant we were happy as long as it was not a weekend, a holiday, a birthday, or a special event of any kind. These occasions always led to the two of us fighting. Alcohol made me carefree and uninhibited, while it made him aggressive and angry. This toxic mix eventually poisoned our relationship completely, causing us to be bitter with one another even when sober. During one fight, I moved out, but we kept dating. So now, whenever we did see each other, it felt like a special occasion. And special occasions meant drinking, and drinking led to more fights. As our relationship deteriorated, I started going out alone on weekends, establishing a ritual of visiting 4 specific bars and staying out until closing time. When I returned home, I would continue drinking until I eventually passed out. However, one Saturday night in August, something went terribly wrong. I distinctly recall coming home, fixing another cocktail, making incoherent phone calls to a few friends, and then lying on my couch with my laptop, joining a chat room, and getting ready to pass out. The rest is a blur. I don't remember driving, but I vaguely recall finding myself in a hotel room in Bluffton with someone I'd apparently met in the chat room. Then it felt like I blinked. And when I opened my eyes, I was on the side of a highway, my empty gas tank probably saving my life. While walking down a seemingly familiar highway, a kind elderly couple stopped to help me. It was around 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. When they mentioned my location, it all clicked, and I realized why the highway felt so familiar. Through tearful sobs, I asked the couple to take me to my church. For years, my life had been in a tailspin. Finally, I had hit rock bottom. Feeling I had nowhere else to turn, I went to the one place that had always been familiar to me. When my good Samaritans arrived at Givans Pentecostal Holiness Church, I saw my aunt outside and asked her to fetch my old Sunday school teacher. She came out, looked at me with pity, and embraced me. Crying uncontrollably, I managed to utter the words, "Walk with me to the altar." Re-embracing a theology I knew to be false, I blamed sin and the devil for all the dysfunction in my life. Over the next several months, I attempted to rebuild the life I once had. I courted my ex-wife, and on January 1st, we were remarried. It didn't take long, though, for me to admit what I already knew deep down. Pentecostalism was like a safety blanket, offering warmth and protection, but it didn't change who I was or provide the help I needed. My wife and I settled into what can be best described as a platonic marriage. We lived in the same house, raising our children together. Though we didn't openly acknowledge it to each other, we knew our marriage had an expiration date. I lived for the better part of a decade in what I call a transparent closet. I didn't claim to be straight, nor did I acknowledge being gay. Despite almost never being alone, these were the loneliest years of my life. I lost all my friends in the gay community, and when church didn't work out for the second time, I lost those friends too. Although I eventually found a community at the UU Church of Savannah, it was challenging to form genuine relationships from behind the glass doors of my closet. Do I have regrets? Sometimes, yes. I have many of them. But then sometimes, no. I'm thankful that I was able to be in the same home and raise my daughters full time. I was able to be there for them during the most formative years of their lives, and that I will never regret. But hitting rock bottom in the way I did has left me with scars and bruises that to this day have not fully healed. And now, on page 10 of my notes, large font though, I come to my point. All those years that my life was spinning out of control, there were people in my life who loved me, people who wanted what was best for me, and who saw the destruction I was causing myself. And although I take full responsibility for all the mistakes I've made, oh, how I wish, while I was on my way to rock bottom, someone had reached out a hand. I can only speculate as to why they did not. Maybe they were busy with their own problems or battling their own vices. Maybe they didn't want to be intrusive or didn't think it was their place to say something. Most likely, they didn't think extending a hand would do any good. Now, to be perfectly honest, I don't know that they would have been wrong. I very well may have rejected their offer of support, and the force of my dissent was probably too great for any one person to prevent me from hitting bottom. But I can't help but believe that things might have turned out differently if, when I hit the bottom, I had somewhere else to turn. Am I my neighbor's keeper? In the creation myth, God does not answer when Cain poses this question, possibly because he's asking the wrong person. This is a question that only I can answer for myself. And today, I implore each of you to take this message that I thought was going to be much longer than it's turned out to be the keeper, the friend, the support system for those who may need it. Reach out, offer a listening ear, show kindness and compassion. You never know the impact your simple gesture may have in someone's life. In the spirit of compassion and unity that transcends any one faith, let us remember the age-old question, am I my neighbor's keeper? And let our answer be a resounding yes. For in our collective commitment to caring for one another, we find the essence of our shared humanity and the strength to overcome even the deepest rock bottoms. Amen. May it be so.